The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Fiato. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to spend some time with Carly Pitman. Carly's work focuses on looking at the part of ourselves that tends to overeat and the parts of ourselves that are connected to all kinds of responses to stress, looking at this through the metaphor of food as mother and how this perspective can help us to understand why we overeat and also shows us a direction to move towards in changing this behavior. Carly helps highly sensitive people who struggle with shame, sugar, and perfectionism, and who yearn to create a kinder, more connected relationship with themselves. There's a deeper, more beautiful story that lives underneath the surface story of our struggles, and this story is both more true and more merciful. It's the story that Carly helps midwife into being. Growing Human Kindness, the name of Carly's website, means to soften self-criticism and to claim the wholeness that is our birthright. Her work arose from two things: her own experience with 20 years of multiple eating disorders, chronic depression, and anxiety. She's had the honor of bearing witness to others' stories of heartbreak, sorrow, and rebirth, and is in awe of human courage and of the human heart. Carly teaches classes, writes books and courses, and speaks to groups. Hi, Carly, and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me on here, Lourdes. I'm really delighted to spend this time with you and your people.
Thank you. I am very grateful for the work that you're doing, Carly, because I think it's so relevant and so important. And I truly feel that this is something that all women, I think everyone, I don't even think that it's limited to women. I think we as humanity can relate to.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting because I live in Austin, Texas, and there's a restaurant that's famous for, they put up little signs on their, it's like a little billboard outside their restaurant. And they're often really witty and really funny. And they put up one during COVID that said, "I need to practice some social distancing from my fridge." You know?
Yeah.
And people got a good laugh about that because people recognize there's something, I think, instinctual in us that when we're experiencing more stress, certainly here in the pandemic, when we're experiencing more isolation, more uncertainty, when we're not feeling as connected to others, when we're feeling more economic pressure, when we're not have our normal systems in place of our rhythms and routines, there's that sense of wanting that place of refuge, a place where we can feel connected. So for many, many people, food then is that refuge, that place that we can go to because it's nurturing, it's soothing to the body, it's often very grounding. It can help people feel relaxed. It can help them feel comforted. It's so the act of being emotionally nourished, as an infant and as a child, is so connected to physical nourishment and food. So I think how we parse those two things out, it makes so much sense then that food can become a place that we return to again and again when we're feeling unmoored and when we're feeling overwhelmed, that food can become that substitute, that place that we're looking for all those things.
Yes, this metaphor of food as mother really, all of the nuances of food, you can connect it to, this archetype of mother. And I was even thinking it's how you come home, right? All the time. It's consistent, right? It's a place that you can go back to, a refuge, like as you've described, a retreat that is comfortable, is receptive, is safe, nourishing, and comforting, all the things that, especially now during this pandemic, we are so longing for because we are not able to get it in the ways we did before. And I think now more than ever, we want to feel safe. We want to feel grounded. We want to feel connected. And so it's just, I'm thinking of so many blog posts and memes I've seen about like the COVID 15, the 15 pounds instead of COVID 19,
like the freshman 15, they're
right.
calling it the COVID 15. Oh my goodness. Yeah. This idea of food as mother, it spoke so personally to me because I know for myself, I had decades of eating disorders and it wasn't for a lack of being aware of them. So when I was 18 years old, I recognized that I had an eating disorder and I was a freshman in college and I was bulimic, and it became very clear that it was something that initially that started out as, a very normal teenage impulse of, well, if I lose 10 pounds, then I'm going to be that search for belonging, and, I'm going to feel more attractive and, just wanting to be loved and accepted by your peers. But that morphed into a full-fledged eating disorder. And I was aware of it. And yet for the next 20 years, it was something that, even despite my knowing and my consciousness about it and my wanting to heal, it was something that was so sticky. And so that kind of sent me down a path of trying to understand how food was something that had such a hold on me. And then in the course of my own journey and then listening to other people's journey, how this idea of food as mother, what that came about was just from really listening when I listened to myself and those parts of myself that were overeating, and really attuning to them and thinking about, what are they needing? What are they finding in the food? What are they seeking in the food? And then listening to other people's stories and listening to people. I remember one woman in a class, she said, sugar is like a bad boyfriend that I can't let go. And I thought, wow, that's really powerful, because she was speaking to this idea that there was a part of her that was aware of how much she was using sugar for soothing and for stress relief and for care. And so there's a part of her that knew the amount of sugar she was eating wasn't serving her greater desire for health, and yet it was meeting this other core need. And so I think that awareness of these fundamental core needs we have as human beings for connection, they can almost override that desire that we have for that need for health, and seeing it that way. As I love the way Clarissa Pinkola Estes describes them. She calls these things the not beautiful. They're the ways that look really, really messy on the outside. They often look a little, distorted or, quote, disfigured, or they're things that our mind can really rail against and call, quote, ugly, or that they shouldn't be. And yet underneath things like overeating, we find so much beauty, because there's some desire in the heart or the body or the soul or the psyche or all of those, that's some need that's driving them, some fundamental desire for protection, for safety, to preserve our well-being, to preserve our functioning. And so I think turning towards overeating and looking at it through that lens, as seeing it arising from some way the soul is trying to preserve itself, rather than, quote, just a bad habit, it changes how we relate to it. So rather than looking at it as something that, quote, I should know better, or I should do better, or even something that we're trying to, quote, hack, that can be a really mechanistic way of looking at ourselves. And instead, it's like really listening to that part of ourselves that is seeking solace in food and connecting with it. And as we have a different relationship with it, from that perspective, it's almost like we move from being the enemy of the overeating, because it's really easy to think of it as an enemy. And we become its ally. We become its companion. We become something that's befriending rather than, fighting or, being caught in a fight stance of this shouldn't be. That's kind of what sent me down this road, is because for so long, Lourdes, I felt so ashamed of my eating disorders. And, I was someone who was earnest and conscientious, and it wasn't for a lack of trying.
Yeah.
And yet I was really, really stuck. And so I had to, what helped me was, I love the way John O'Donohue calls it, the reverence of approach. Is, could I approach this, quote, not beautiful part of myself with reverence and with respect and with understanding and with listening and with curiosity and with wondering and with grace and with compassion. And that way of approach then yields a much different kind of way of responding. And it's almost like it really becomes something that we can call, quote, not beautiful. It becomes something of tremendous beauty. It's like our heart changes towards it. Our own heart softens towards ourselves.
Yeah, it's almost as as I'm hearing you, it's the shift in our approach to this aspect of ourselves, and a shift in this relationship to this part of ourselves that is actually a huge part of the changing of the behavior.
Yes. Yeah, you just said in a sentence what it's exactly it. When I was kind of walking all the way around. Yes, that's exactly what I discovered. Because what happens when we have these, in my experience, when we have these really messy ways on the outside, they look messy, ways of caring for stress and overwhelm and trauma and all those things. And, growing up in Western American culture where I was raised, and I imagine a lot of Western cultures are like this, but particularly in North America, there's a real focus, I think, on kind of triumph and overcoming. And it's this idea of kind of controlling your own destiny. And so a lot of our, the people that we put on magazine covers and the people that we esteem are people who seem to kind of have it together and overcome their challenges. And so I think what can happen is, when we're confronted with those wounded parts of ourselves, that it's like we can look at them like, oh, we've got to go at them with a sword and go to battle with them, or it can be something that we feel shame about, and we may not like the ways that we cope with these frightened or overwhelmed or scared parts of us that long for soothing and long for connection. So then there's this other layer then, where there's the whatever we're experiencing that feels overwhelming in that moment. And then there's something in us that then rises up in a feeling of, I don't like that about myself, that when I feel stressed, I eat. Or maybe for other people, the other one I've heard a lot in COVID is all the Netflix watching, it's the binge
Yes.
watching. But that one makes sense to me too, because if people are feeling disconnected from their loved ones, I think about myself and, my extended family, I probably won't see till next year because, my father has a heart condition. And so they're not able to have visitors right now. It's like, well, if we can't see our people, then, your favorite show becomes your people.
Right. Yes.
So again, if we can look at it through the eyes of connection, if the base human need that we have is for connection on so many different levels, whether it's connection with ourselves, with our own being, connection with others, connection with nature, connection with source, connection with the living world. When we feel those ruptures, when we feel that disconnection, everything in us is wired to connect. And so food and Netflix, and even for some people, it's acquisition or shopping, all those things, they just become the substitute ways that when we're feeling disconnected, that we're trying to bring some sense of connection, whether it's on a ground floor level of stress relief, but sometimes it's something more deeper. It's just that sense of wanting to feel that living thread, that sense of connection.
Yeah, this your work really reminds me a lot of I don't know if I'm sure you're familiar with her work, Dr. Anita Johnston, and
Hmm.
she wrote the book Eating by the Light of the Moon.
Yes, an amazing book. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
And one of the things I remember from one of our conversations, she's been on the podcast twice, I believe. She was talking about how even like the kinds of foods that we are eating can speak to the type of nourishment that we are seeking. And she gave the example of, if you're wanting to eat a lot of sugar, a lot of sweets, which I'm like, yes, that's me.
Yes.
And she said that one way to look at that is your body, your psyche is trying to let you know that it needs more sweetness, it needs more ease. It needs, and if you think about what sugar, if you think about how it tastes and why we are drawn to it. She did that with the other tastes, like salty, also, that maybe with
Oh,
salty foods like chips. And she said, or, that can speak to a need for maybe more action, more needing to speak up, more maybe we've been avoiding conflict and we need to be a little saltier. She was, and I thought that was really fascinating. And yeah,
wow. So rich. That makes
yeah.
so much sense to me. Yes, it's like there's and again, what I'm hearing you say is there's a wisdom to the ways we feel led to, whether it's we're chomping on salty nuts or wanting the sweet and the soothing. Yeah, that definitely resonates with my experience. It's interesting with the sugar, what I often find, sugar, or even we think of those really comforty foods like bread, or
Yeah.
with those foods in particular, what I often hear when people describe them is it's a sense of that I'm heard, that I'm understood, that I'm acknowledged, that I'm listened
Mhm.
to. What kind of in attachment circles they call attunement, or the way to think of that is empathy. Really,
Yeah. Yeah.
so with food, if I go and have a slice of bread and butter, or have a bowl of ice cream, and I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling like it's like this thirst for compassion, or for someone to really get my inner experience, for someone to say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I understand that need to be heard, that need to be understood, to kind of have a warm embrace of empathy for your experience.
Yeah.
When we go to another person for that, there's always the risk that we won't be heard, or that someone won't be able to hear us or mirror us or receive us. And so, in many ways, what food is a way of, when I would overeat certain foods, I could tell that there was almost like this desperate quality while I was eating. It was kind of a frantic eating.
Yeah.
And that franticness was that part of me that was feeling scared, or that was feeling frustrated, or often it was some kind of need for tenderness and empathy. That by the act of eating, it's like the food itself became the mirror. The food itself became the other who was able to receive me. It became that mothering presence that when I was eating, it was almost like the food was saying to me, oh, sweetheart, yes, I know this is really hard for you. Or I hear how scared you are. Or I'm really seeing how hard you're struggling. It's like the food becomes the empathetic, caring presence.
Yeah, the food reflects back what we are feeling and needing, right? Like a mirror.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a loving mirror that then doesn't ask anything of you. There's not the same risk with the food, where the food can just receive you in a
Yeah.
way that with another person, if you're sharing your heart with them and it goes sideways, or if you're met with criticism, or you're met with shame, or you have someone who dismisses or minimizes your feelings. So that was something that I would see often, particularly with those kind of more comfort foods, was there was that desire to be seen and heard and understood. And while food in some ways can be a quote perfect mirror, and that it's kind of like a pet, you can go and cuddle a pet, and the pet isn't, your dog is just going to look at you, it's there's not as much risk there that there could be a rupture in the relationship, or that you could be met with criticism. So that's where the risk is with people. But
Yeah.
again, the challenge with that, though, is while the food on one level does meet the need, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
It does and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't really satiate that need for connection, and it gives it just enough
Yeah.
to kind of dial it down a little bit, but it doesn't really satiate and doesn't really meet that fullness that we're wanting.
Yeah, so it's almost really like this sense that even though it doesn't satiate and it's not as satisfying long term, it is safe though, right? And so it's a way to play it safe and get your fix of connection and mirroring, validation. Yeah.
And I think that's such a key point, what you just said, because that's exactly it. It's the need for safety that's trumping everything else. Because if you have this need for connection, and if for whatever reasons it doesn't feel safe to reach out to others to have that need met, you're looking for that substitute. And so
Yeah.
food becomes a substitute. Or for some people, it might be something else. But it's the safe substitute. It's where you feel like you can be vulnerable, where you feel like you can be heard, where you feel like you can be seen. So the growth process, then, if we're looking at, well, kind of what helps is over time, then it's how do we transition then food as that source of safety, and food as the mother, and food as that secure base. And how do we nurture that secure base within ourselves? And also then finding those trusted places in others where it is safe to open the heart, and where it is safe to, receive connection, and where it is safe to share your being with another. And that's a different process, right, than just trying to say, well, I'm just going to break out of this habit. Because what you're really, you're recognizing that, oh, there's something really tender underneath that drive for food, and acknowledging the tenderness of that rather than demanding change. So it's almost like, I think the process in my experience of healing becomes something that the focus then isn't so much on how do I fix the behavior, but how do I nurture the safety? How do I nurture that safety within my being and with others, so that I can ask for help from others when I'm struggling, so that I can share myself with others, so that I can reach out when I'm longing for connection. And so it's like gradually over time, those other refuges, the refuge within our own being, deepening those connections we have with the wider world, they come over time to gradually replace food. And in my experience, it doesn't mean that we don't ever occasionally overeat, or that food, it's almost like food becomes one of many ways that we have connection rather than the primary way. It has less of you still might, I know it was Canadian Thanksgiving earlier this week, and that, you've got American Thanksgiving in November. And so there is a time where you celebrate food and the abundance of food, and this idea of gratitude. Or for some people, maybe it's a Sunday dinner, or a Friday night Shabbat, where there's a celebration and a coming together. But again, it's like one of many ways of nurturing connection rather than a soul way, or a way that, that causes other, health problems or other suffering.
Yeah. Carly, I love how you focused on, the different ways that our relationship with food can begin to expand. It doesn't just become about the food. And it's also, in order to do this, not only are we getting into conscious relationship with the part of us that overeats, but it's also, I look at it as just getting into relationship, because it seems to me that before we become aware and before we have a compassionate understanding of the part of us that can overeat, there's a disconnect. There's a wanting to push that part away. There's a judgmental, critical response to this part of ourselves. And I think this really flows very well into the emphasis in your work on, the softening and the self-compassion. And again, this is not only am I now consciously aware of the part of me that is overeating as now a part that needs comfort and needs connection and needs safety, but I also am now in a loving, nurturing relationship with this part of myself.
Yes, that's really beautifully said. Yeah, it's like in some ways what we begin to nurture is the inner mother within ourselves. And for me, you spoke about that mother archetype. And for me, I can say in my own personal journey, really connecting to that archetype was very, very helpful to me. It's on some ways, it was almost like opening myself to the mothering presence and all the ways that mothering presence is present in our world, whether it was, some people find that through gardening and through growing plants from seed to fruit or from seed to vegetable. You can find that certainly in caring for pets and animals and in relationship with loved ones. But opening to all the ways that, in some ways, it's opening to receive love, of opening to all the ways that we're cared for, and having that feel like something that is embodied and really grounded in my being. So like there's rituals that I do every day that remind me of that connection and feed that connection. Because if you think about the ways that we have this human body and it has needs, and one of the paths that I walk is I walk the Sufi path. And one of the things in Sufism is they talk about our needs as holy. And they also talk about this idea that your body makes claims upon you. And so we know we need to eat a certain time, several times a day. We need sleep, we need water, we need sunshine, we need rest, we need connection. And so in many ways, the path of befriending our neediness and healing our relationship with food, for many, many people, I find that those two things dance among each other. Because it's this neediness that we often feel some sort of shame about, whether it's feeling shame about loneliness or feeling shame about our emotions or about our emotional needs, or feeling shame about our hungers, feeling shame about our desire for connection, feeling shame about needing help or support. So how we approach our human needs, if there's some way we feel like our needs aren't okay, or they need to be minimized, or there's something shameful, then there's not a way that we feel comfortable either acknowledging them or meeting them directly. And then that's where food can step in as well, because then we're feeling this deficit, and then we're feeling unnourished, we're feeling in some ways deprived and neglected and uncared for and unprotected. And so then food can be a way that steps in to soothe us when we're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, overworked, undernourished, underrested. And so that dance of opening to our needs, making space for our needs, of having a different relationship with our needs, which often then opens up this different relationship to receiving. It's that, because when we're in that receptive mode of receiving help, of receiving nurturing, of allowing that mother to nurture us, it's anytime we're in a receiving place, it's very vulnerable, because we might have times that we experienced as young ones where when we had needs, our needs were criticized, or our needs were dismissed, or our needs were shamed, or whether it was explicit or implicit, whether we just kind of felt it. I can even remember times in elementary school where having to go to the bathroom at a certain time would be met with kind of irritation from teachers. Like, didn't you just have a chance to go to the bathroom? That's just a minor example, but all those ways that you can internalize this sense of, oh, I shouldn't have needs, or I should be in more control of my needs. And so then as adults, we grow up with, in some ways, a distorted relationship with our needs, where they feel like something that we, quote, shouldn't have. I mean, even to say the word neediness, for most people, just to say that, it feels, most people, it just kind of makes them feel sick inside. Like, oh, why would I? It makes people shudder. Like, oh gosh, why would I ever want to feel needy?
Or you hear people say things almost like a badge of honor, that I don't need anything or anyone.
Yes.
It's right. It's almost like I'm strong. I don't need anything. I'm good. And I think that goes with that inability to receive, right? Because I don't need anything. And
yes, it can be a defense. It can be a way of, if you don't need anything, then you don't risk asking for help and being disappointed, or asking for help and being told no, or asking for help and, and getting a negative reaction, I remember reading an interview, and I can't remember who it was, but it was about someone who was very successful and talking about how they only needed 4 hours of sleep a night. And I remember thinking, oh, isn't that interesting? That kind of what you were discussing is like this idea that not needing sleep or only needing a little bit of sleep was considered for this person a part of the reason they were so successful and able to do
Yeah.
so much. So there is a way we can think that somehow minimizing our needs is a sign of we can almost equate it with adulthood. Like you're a well-functioning adult if you've learned how to
Yeah.
if you've learned how to minimize your needs. And so for a lot of the people I work with, Lourdes, most of the people I work with are highly sensitive people.
Me too.
Yes, I
Yeah,
can
me too.
imagine. I imagine we
Yeah.
have that in common. And we're both highly sensitive people.
We both are.
With highly sensitive people, it's not that our needs are greater than others, but I find that with highly sensitive people, we're more attuned to our needs. We're more attuned to our feelings and our needs. They're more vibrant, and so they're just something that feels more present. And that can create, though, a sense of shame of, in a culture that isn't always very open to feeling or to emotion, that it can create a sense of my needs are too much, my feelings are too much, I need to minimize them. And so that's one of those threads that can go into feeding the overeating, because then the food becomes the way that, again, it's that way you can receive the mother. Food becomes the way you can receive that mothering. And it feels more risky, or it feels more vulnerable to say to someone, hey, I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling frustrated about something, when you're needing to set a boundary around something, or when you need to be heard. Those are riskier things. And yet it's in those steps forward that, we reclaim that capacity to receive that nurturing and to receive that help and support that truly feeds and nourishes us, as well as, it's really building that inner mother within our own being and really connecting to that archetype within ourselves. It's that refuge that's always, always, always available.
This is so synchronistic, because one thing that I've been doing lately with clients, and then of course everything I do with clients, I also practice on myself and with my family. And it's just asking the question of those you love and those you care about, and just asking them and asking yourself too, what do I need? And that question really stumps people. I actually practiced it on my husband the other day. And I said to, I just asked him, is there anything you need? What do you need? And it's funny. It was like, well, what do you mean? And then even asked my son, is there anything you need from mommy? And there's something I think about when you ask someone that and you really want to know, that can actually make the receiver feel very vulnerable and almost not know how to answer. Right?
Yes. That's such a beautiful question of what are we needing? And when I was listening to you talk about how you were asking your husband and your son, I just felt my whole body soften and felt all this warmth of, it's such a generous invitation to be asked, what are you needing? And how can I support you? And the vulnerability that brings up of connecting to those places of need within us. I was really surprised, because I always felt like I was someone who was very attuned with how I was feeling or what I was needing. And when I looked further, though, I saw that I had a lot of resistance. There were actually some parts that were really scared of letting people know some of my needs. It's like I had this part that felt like it was my job to be kind of cool and calm and collected, and almost like be a stoic, like pretend that I wasn't really bothered about something or not showing how scared I was. And that part felt very vulnerable, sharing some of my deeper vulnerability with people, or, would feel okay sharing my vulnerability maybe after I'd processed it and I wasn't feeling vulnerable anymore. But in the moment when I was really needing help and support, there were all kinds of other emotions, a lot of anxiety that would arise in my body, of a feeling like, oh gosh, almost like danger, danger, don't share that with someone. And that was really interesting to discover those parts in me that had some real fears about sharing my vulnerability and my needs with others.
Carly, this goes back to what you were saying earlier about food being safe.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's the place that's what I would go to as food became. I remember as a little girl, I remember when microwave popcorn came out. You remember that?
I remember that.
I remember when the cookie dough that came in a tube that you didn't even have to like make it, you could just slice it and bake cookies. And I would make my microwave popcorn and I would take a spoon and open the cookie dough and I would eat the cookies straight out of the tube and I would have my microwave popcorn. And that was how I coped with, I was probably, oh gosh, like 6th, 7th grade, middle school years when, such a, not an easy time at all for anyone. And that was how I coped with, when you go to junior high and you never know from one day to another who's your friend or not, I would let down at home at night watching my TV show with my microwave popcorn and my my raw cookie dough. And that became that source of safety, of love and care, and a pattern that continued for a long, long time with a lot of tenderness underneath it.
Carly, if someone is listening and, this is resonating with them and they're really not sure where to begin, this process of shifting their relationship with food and their approach to the part of themselves that overeats, what are some beginning steps someone could take after listening to our conversation?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, some first steps that they can take, and then I can also share some ways that if people are interested in learning more about my work, how they can do it. But yeah, one of the first things I think to do is this pause that you and I have been speaking to, that's really about how do we look at overeating with different eyes. So one of the things that we talk about is that if we can look at food cravings or kind of wanting to eat as it's almost like a prayer in disguise. It's some part of us that's asking for help. And so in that moment, let's say, if someone's having a really difficult day and they find themselves in front of the fridge or maybe heading to a drive-through and they notice there's that drive for food, that's the perfect opportunity to just take a few minutes to just pause and say, oh, wow, that question that you so beautifully asked, your son and your husband, what am I feeling and what am I needing? So there might be a way that we're feeling, someone might be feeling concerned of, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to have a job with COVID and there's more layoffs, or someone might be feeling concerned about the health of a loved one, or maybe there's a relationship challenge with a child or a partner. But just taking a moment to pause and really feel what's that, taking that U-turn of, in some ways it's moving away from the food and it's turning within to saying, what am I feeling and what am I needing? And then I've got a free tool that I offer to people. It's called the Binge Rescue Worksheet. The Binge Rescue Worksheet can be really helpful because it walks you through that process of tuning into what am I needing and what am I feeling. And so it's building that inner muscle of inner attunement, and it's building that inner mother, that nurturing space where we're feeling that sense of holding and care and nurturing that we're seeking in the food. So it's building that internal sense of holding rather than seeking it in the food. So if you're wanting help with overeating, I really encourage you to give the worksheet a try. It can be a great help in the moment when you're feeling overwhelmed.
And Carly, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you and learn more about your work?
You can find me at www.growinghumankindness.com. We have a do-at-home course there, and we have a newsletter and lots of free resources where you can learn more about our offerings.
Carly, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and was deeply touched by many of the insights you shared and your wisdom around this. And I am so excited to share our conversation with the world.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Lourdes. It was really a delight for me.
Take care. Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting Women in Depth with a one-time or recurring donation. Any amount is appreciated and helps us continue to provide free, quality content for the world. If donating resonates with you, you can find the donation link on today's show notes. You can also follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.